A few nights ago, I finished my first playthrough of Fall of Porcupine, and I'm happy to share that for the most part, it's everything I hoped it would be. But what, specifically, does the game do so well? Will fans of other narrative games enjoy it? Is it too similar to Night in the Woods? Was there anything I didn't like about it? Let's dive in. First off, they really nailed the characters with this one. As I said in my review of the demo, the characters really shine through, and that's absolutely the case in the finished game. Finley is a wonderful protagonist. He's likable, makes hilarious observations, and is really easy to cheer for. As the game goes on, you really want to see him succeed, and when the realities of the medical profession wear on him, it's genuinely heartbreaking. It's easy to put yourself in his shoes, and to hope, just as he does, that by becoming a doctor, he can help make the world a better place. The companions are great too. Carl is as advertised, hot-headed and mercurial, but ultimately the kind of guy you want with you when the going gets tough. He reminds me a bit of a combination of Greg from Night in the Woods and Ryuji from Persona 5. Pima is delightful and brings out the best in Finley at all times. In a game that has some really emotional moments, she's a constant source of relief for both Finley and the player. But I don't think any character benefited from the full game more than Mia, who ended up being my favorite sidekick. She's a great counterpart to Finley, in that she's going through many of the same trials and tribulations as him at the same point in her life. Her hangout segments are spectacular, and really touch on how important it is to maintain a bond with your coworkers that goes beyond the office. Many of the side characters are worth mentioning as well. Adele von Witterstein doesn't just have an S-tier name, she's a great source of information about Porcupine. I came to really enjoy checking in on Frauke at the start of every day, and her advice, though esoteric, really helps support the game's message about the importance of teamwork. Dr. Krokowski, who seemed primed for an antagonist role based on the demo and the marketing, undergoes one hell of a face turn over the course of the game, and ended up coming off as one of the more authentically written characters. But no side character shines as brightly as Irma, Giuliano's wonderful mother. Her whimsical stories, with the charming illustrations that accompany them, are one of the game's greatest strengths, and ended up being something I looked forward to every time Finley stopped by to treat her. When I start making character-focused content, my first video will definitely be about her. She also plays a critical role in the story, which reaches a fever pitch in the third act of the game. For the first two acts, it's a bit of a slow burn, as we see the issues plaguing St. Ursula's, familiarize ourselves with the unique culture of Porcupine, and get some hints about why the townsfolk distrust the hospital. But in the game's final hours, the story becomes a dramatic sprint to the finish line that's hard to put down. The pacing isn't spectacular, but as I mentioned in my demo review, that's pretty typical for games like this, so I didn't see it as a major issue or anything. Speaking of similar games, before release, a lot of folks, including Mrs. Albatross, were concerned that Fall of Porcupine might be too similar to Night in the Woods. Fortunately, I feel pretty strongly in saying that the game stands out on its own. It's certainly a Night in the Woods-like game. The art style, story structure, and focus on building relationships with a small group of companions is all similar, but the contents of the game are wildly different. Finley and his friends are young professionals, which gives them a very different outlook on life than May and her cohorts. And Porcupine's European aesthetic is nothing like the Rust Belt Gothic atmosphere of Possum Springs. And while Night in the Woods is focused on the economic and political realities of towns like Possum Springs, Fall of Porcupine tackles something else: the difficulty of healthcare work. It's a theme that the game wholly commits to, from the way Finley handles the first death in his ward, to the difficulty of its minigames, and the chaotic drama of the finale. It's this, above all else, that makes Fall of Porcupine unique in its genre. As the game goes on, your sympathy for healthcare workers increases, especially as Finley and his comrades are hit with the two-pronged attack of an angry mob and institutional corruption. Critical Rabbit said they wanted to make this game a love letter to healthcare workers, and on that front, they certainly succeeded. Another highlight, for me, were the minigames. Fall of Porcupine mixes some simplistic, leisurely minigames, like barroom brawls and basketball games, with more challenging tasks, like injecting patients with needles and diagnosing illnesses. These tasks start out fairly easy, but ratchet up in intensity as the game goes on. They handle this brilliantly, as it gives the player an evolving challenge while also emphasizing the difficulty of healthcare work. Fortunately, none of the medical minigames have an impact on story outcomes, at least not that I could tell. But still, if you find the minigames to be too frustrating, or you're just not into that type of thing, you can always turn on the easy minigame setting at any time by pausing the game, going to options, and checking under the accessibility tab. I'm really glad they added this feature, because while I like the point they're trying to make with the difficult minigames, I was concerned that not everyone in their target audience would feel the same way. There are a few translation issues here and there, but nothing like we saw in the demo, so the developers really did a good job patching that one up. Now, all that having been said, there were a few things that did disappoint me about the game. The soundtrack isn't bad, but the music has more of an ambient feel to it, kind of like the music you might hear while you're exploring an area in Elden Ring. This differs greatly from the demo, which had more of a driving, engaging soundtrack. There are some scenes where the ambience really works well, but overall, I much preferred the latter. In a game like this, where you spend so much time reading, I just think it helps things flow better. There were also a few unfortunate bugs. My game crashed at one of the game's most emotional moments. A character repeated himself about 3 times in what was supposed to be a heartfelt speech. Words are occasionally missing from dialogue, and some of the tooltips either don't work or include some pieces of code. None of this is all that unusual for a new release these days, especially an indie game, so I don't fault the developers for this too much, and I'm sure they'll get it fixed in future updates. Circling back to the story, though I enjoyed it, it does end a bit abruptly, and I came away wishing that the postcards and the credits had instead come in the form of an in-game epilogue. Porcupine is a unique little town, and it's full of some really interesting characters, so I would have liked to have had the chance to say goodbye to them following the dramatic climax. It also leaves a few plot points strangely unaddressed, but I have some theories about what might be going on there. Stay tuned for some videos about that down the line. As for Porcupine itself, I do have to say that the town is, at times, rather empty. On his way to work in the mornings, there are a number of people for Finley to talk to, like Frauke, Adele, and Maggie. But at night, when the game sometimes gives the player free reign of Finley, there's often entire sections of the town where there's no one to talk to. I wouldn't be surprised if this changed on a future update, or if they decide to do DLC, so it's something we'll have to keep an eye on moving forward. But still, those are just a few small criticisms of a game I really enjoyed. Overall, I think Fall of Porcupine is a wonderful game that gives healthcare workers the flowers they deserve while giving fans of narrative games the character-driven story experience they've been itching for. Also, it's available for just $17 US, which is a steal for a game that has about 8 hours of playtime, so you're getting some serious bang for your buck. So with that said, what's next for this channel and Fall of Porcupine? Well, starting next month, I'll be dropping some content for the game, starting with an essay on the way the game fulfills its goal of honoring the difficult lives of healthcare workers. I'll also be posting some Let's Plays of the game's best segments in an effort to show off some of the highlights of the game. In the meantime, stay tuned for more content on Night in the Woods and other narrative games. Next week, I'll be dropping the first of 2 video essays on Germ, followed by a frame-by-frame breakdown of the Revenant Hill trailer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.